Hello. Happiness in the home is a very large and very important subject. There is ample evidence from sociological and other studies that happy homes make for a happy society. If you have a society made up of happy homes, flourishing and contented, then that society is going to be happy. On the other hand, if you have lots of dysfunctional homes, then the society will suffer from all kinds of social problems and social pathologies. Now, in this whole question, something that is often overlooked but is very important is that of home design, the physical structure and layout of houses. That's because the physical construction of the house actually has an enormous influence upon, as well as being influenced by, the kind of activities that take place within it and the kind of human relations that they create and embody. So if homes are designed in a way that doesn't allow for certain kinds of human interaction and relationship, it's going to have an enormous impact upon the way in which homes develop, or for that matter, do not. Now, back in the 19th century, particularly in the period we call the Belle Epoque, the period between 1873 and 1914, there was a very dominant ideology, if you like, of what home life should be like. This was the famous or infamous domestic ideology. And it was a vision of the home as the place where the family lived, apart from, in many ways, the world outside. And within that household, within that family, the home was created by the relationships between its different elements, and particularly between men and women. And a crucial part of this was a very clear division of roles and labour between men and women, which was also reflected in the relationship that both sexes had with the worlds of work and public life. Now, this was both reflected in and produced by a particular kind of physical design for houses from that period, and also the way in which neighbourhoods and developments were built by developers. Now, this, however, was not uncontested. There were two quite different radical critiques of this model of housing and of the kind of home that it created. One was put forward by radical feminists, the other by radical socialists and social democrats. What both of these critiques had in common was the idea that women were oppressed by the domestic role that this kind of housing created. And the solution in both cases was to design houses differently, and in particular, to build houses that did not have kitchens or communal dining areas. Instead, the functions of preparing food and eating shared meals would take place outside the home. Now, at this point, these two theories departed from each other because the socialist theories basically assumed that the meals would be consumed in collective public facilities such as works canteens, whereas what the feminists argued for in the main part was communal living or shared housekeeping. The point was that this was no longer done in individual homes. It was done outside the house. And the idea was that you could reconstruct the whole built environment so that people lived in large shared apartment developments, living in apartments which didn't have kitchens, but taking part in use of a common or shared kitchen and dining room for the entire development. Now, in 1931, Herbert Hoover called a conference on housing in Washington, D.C. while he was president, and that set in train a pattern of housing development found across the Western world between roughly 1931 and, well, really today, certainly up until about the 1970s. And this is one which was a revival, if you will, of the classic idea of the Belle Epoque, but adjusted for a number of things, particularly the advent of the motor car and the development of the electrical home appliance, both of which obviously had a huge impact. Now, for a long time, this was very successful, despite the fact that many people are very critical of it. But it was gradually undermined from the early 1960s onwards in the public sector by a number of faddish policies pushed and promoted by different schools of architects, which led to developments in both home design and the layout of public housing estates, which proved to have catastrophic social consequences and which played a major part in the destruction of homes and wider society in many of the major cities of the Western world. In the private sector, what you find is that the whole model of the home and of the house design that's associated with it is undermined by a number of financial, economic and technological changes which have ideological consequences. And by the time you get to the 1980s, or even more, the 2000s and the decade we're in now, what you find is that increasingly the home is no longer working properly in many cases. And the design of housing that we have is also changing in response to this. And interestingly, what we're finding is that it's changing in the same way that was advocated by those radical feminists back in the 1890s and 1900s. And we are seeing once again in the work of people like the young Spanish architect Ana Puigdana, a case being made for building houses without kitchens in order, quite deliberately, to change the nature of the home and the nature of domestic relations. Now, this is, because of the importance of the home for happiness and for society at large, an enormously important question. And the kind of debates that we had in the early part of the 20th century are now once again being joined.